these things, did they actually wrong people? I mean, cheating on income taxes didn't actually wrong me as an individual. It wronged the government, and sure, maybe with some of the tax that could have paid for something I was going to use. But is it worth retribution, or do we want to maybe take one of those three other aspects of reasons for incarceration into account? With this idea of retribution, the state becomes the punisher and enforces that retribution. They can fines, financial penalties, and tariffs as well. So that doesn't often consider this idea of mitigating circumstances. So a lot of these punishments can actually ruin somebody's life, which may actually drive them towards more crime. So a bit of a problem with retribution in that fact. What is the goal of retribution? It doesn't actually change the offender at all, and it doesn't actually give anything back to society except revenge. So have a look at that question there. I want you to write it down and see if you can come up with an answer to it. Just pause this video. I want you to also consider this idea as of international law, with persons coming to a prison as the punishment, not for punishment. All right. This idea of the loss of liberty, freedom, of choice, and separation from friends and family—that's the actual loss, not having to be in a crappy situation. What I mean is that you look at the prisons in some countries, let's say in Australia, compared to some European nations, where they are almost set out to be sort of like a hotel, not high luxury, but at the same time, it's not like what we see portrayed in like American media, with it being an awful experience. I mean, of course, there shouldn't be necessarily an incentive to go there, but it shouldn't be a place that has anything such as like beatings, torture, really poor food, poor water, no access to healthcare, encouragement of other prisoners dealing out their own version of violence. There's a bit of a problem when we say we want people in prison to get punished within prison, because theoretically, in a society where we have a court, the punishment is being separated and going to prison, not necessarily being sent to prison and then double punished within prison itself. What we can do is we can incapacitate people. So we could basically lock them away, or we could execute them as well. I'm not saying this is something that we have in Australia necessarily when it comes to execution, but it's this idea of like banishing people. In the past, they forced them to enlist in the army and basically just leave society. So it does go around the offender as well. So obviously, you're probably not going to send an offender who is a pregnant woman off enlisting in the army. It's going to take the context of the person into place, the offender. Very few offenders are responsible for a large number of violent property crimes. Therefore, the career criminals should be locked up in this case, but you can't really predict who the repeat offenders are. So in this idea, we want to lock up all people for more time, just in case they reoffend. This is a bit of a problem, right? I can imagine you're starting to understand and starting to consider at least how this could be problematic. You also want to make sure that we want to think about how the lengths of sentences are dished out, whether it's banishment, prison. If we commit to execution, we have to be 100% sure it happened, and there are no mitigating circumstances and no doubt at all, because it is permanent. And they want to make sure that by the time they're leaving their incapacitation or their incarceration, that they do not offend. What happens when they get out? Majority of people do get out of prison. Right? And of course, this comes to this idea of punishing people for what we think they're going to do, which is a big problem when it comes to justice, right? We want to punish people theoretically for what they have done and not what they are going to do. Sure, they may be saying, "Oh, when I get out of here, I'm gonna do something. I'm gonna do something bad. I'm gonna rob a bank." But we can't punish them for something that's in the future that they haven't actually done yet. Talking about it is not actually committing the crime. And then finally, we want to think about this idea about how incapacitation can be warped around what society considers to be the deviants or the undesirables. So we actually would see people who would be prone to potentially committing crimes, people who are mentally ill, abuse of alcohol and drugs. Racism can occur through this, and we start targeting people as a society who we think might commit crimes, and so stereotypes will warp the justice system rather than actually having an equal and fair, accessible justice system available. Of course, we want to have longer sentences for chronic criminals, but we should also consider this with how we can't actually incarcerate ourselves out of crime. So we can't just put people away forever and say, look, if you do anything wrong, you're going to be put in prison for 100 years. All right? It doesn't work that way. Another way that we look at incarceration is this idea of deterrence. So we want to stop people from committing a crime or crimes by showing what happens to people if they commit the crime. So a lot of places love to be tough on crime, you know, that we're gonna put somebody in jail. If you're caught with marijuana, we're gonna put you in jail for 100 years, right? Problem is though, like it says down the bottom on this screen, you can't measure how many crimes aren't committed. You can only measure the offences that are actually committed, right? There's no reliable evidence to show that these sanctions can deter crime. Crimes aren't always done planned and calculated. They're done out of passion, out of anger. They're done out of desperation or need. Not not rational thinking and not that planning ahead. There's a lot of different factors changed, and it's basically driven by those heavy, really unpredictable emotions. So deterrence is good for maybe like 0.001% of the population. You know, if you said that up at Gangala Marketplace, we're going to deter people from jaywalking by giving anyone caught a $5,000 fine, right? Maybe that would change things, and having police there all the time, or roughly half the time. But, you know, at the same time, people aren't crossing the road when it's dangerous, planning to do it when it's dangerous. They're doing it because they're missing their bus. They have to wait another hour for their bus, so they just dart across the road. There are no cars there, so there is no danger. So that's something to consider as well. Consider that when we're looking at this idea of deterrence. And then finally, we have rehabilitation. So look at this idea of there are curable problems which motivate people to commit crimes. And we've talked about this before. Poverty, lack of job skills, low self-esteem, hostility towards authority. People have these problems that can be solved. I'm not saying they're easy to solve, but they can be solved. And the goal is to restore them, the person, the convicted offender, to basically be a person who can re-enter society and contribute back to society and benefit from therapy, benefit from education, all these things that would allow them to be a contributing member to society. There is something going on, right? Something's going on with them, and we want to focus on them and how we can bring them back to what we consider to be normal and compliant, and then hopefully they will return back to society that way. And then, of course, some society has times of or periods of dissatisfaction, like it says here. Therefore, we want to have this idea of look, we can't assume that people are going to commit crimes in the future, yeah, but they will. There will be a time where people do commit crimes, but we can't say rehabilitation is not working because look, John here murdered somebody again. All right, because 1% of the time, sure, that happens, but 99% of the time, Louise over here didn't rob a bank again, or she didn't steal a handbag or a PlayStation again. It was successful. You only hear about the unsuccessful ones. And then this idea of the parole board, with trying to avoid this idea of maximum minimum terms. If somebody committed a crime that a judge says, you know what, you robbed a bank, you're going to put 10 years in prison, but after a few years, it's looking like that person is actually resolving their problems, they're getting on top of their money issues, you know, it was really driven by desperation at the time because they owed a whole bunch of money, etc., etc., that minimum sentence would basically have to stay. So it causes a bit of a problem. Yeah? And then finally here as well, they've really focused on retribution, deterrence, and incapacitation worldwide rather than rehabilitation. And politicians, like I said before, it causes a bit of an issue. That 1%, like it says at the bottom there, really shows on the outside in the media, all that stuff. Oh my gosh, that person reoffended. But all the successful cases of rehabilitation are never shown. Recidivism is something else as well, so recommitting the crimes. Right, so if we have long sentences with no rehabilitation or re-entry, we see people basically committing those crimes again. Right, so we see recidivism. It's very hard to say. Try saying it. What we see is that we have to set up in our prisons these programs to support people and allow them to come back into society, understanding what is right and wrong, how to solve their problems or working towards that, and also some sort of therapy as well. Like it says on here, you could just read it quickly, you can pause me or not. There was 60% recidivism rate in the US compared to 50 in the UK. And the UK focuses on rehabilitation and education, so they actually see less people committing crimes once they're back out of jail. And they classify it as mental health rather than crime, which is really interesting. So I hope you take away from this reasons why we incarcerate people, that is, put them in prison. And I hope you start to think about how we can use rehabilitation as a real focus point for what we look at, because 9 times out of 10, the crimes that people are committing going to jail, like I said, do have that background of mental health issues or some sort of other extenuating circumstances that can be solved, can be supported. Those people can be educated and given therapy to allow them to return to some sort of normality in society. So, I look forward to seeing you next week. Good luck with all of your work, and I hope you enjoy.